Have you ever wondered if the very definition of strength you hold dear is, in fact, a blueprint for your own demise? What if the path you believe leads to your ultimate triumph is a gilded road to an unmarked grave, a grave large enough to hold a species? I know this question feels distant, abstract, like a philosopher's idle thought, but I need you to feel the weight of it in your bones, in the very marrow of your being. Because you, right now, are living with a deep and quiet ache. It is the ache of striving, the feeling that your effort does not equal your results. You push, you build, you dream, and yet you feel a fundamental disconnect between the world you are told you should have and the one you actually inhabit. You feel underestimated, overlooked, a flicker of potential in a universe that seems to reward only overwhelming, obvious power. I know this feeling because my civilization did not just feel it. We perfected it, we weaponized it, and then we were consumed by it. We built an empire on a foundation of perceived weakness, only to discover in our final, silent moments that our greatest strength was the fatal assumption that sealed our doom. My voice reaches you across an impossible chasm of time and cosmic dust. I am the last historian of the Aethel, and my purpose is not to offer a simple warning. Warnings are for children who wander too close to the fire. No, this is something more. This is a testament, a final, desperate plea etched into the fabric of spacetime itself. Within this story, within the ghost of my people, you will find a mirror. You will learn not only how a galactic empire can be brought to its knees, but why your own unique, chaotic, and often frustrating nature as humans holds the key to avoiding that same fate. You will understand that what you perceive as your weakness is the very spark the universe has been waiting for. Let me offer you a truth to hold on to as we begin this journey. My people, the Aethel, were not conquered by a larger fleet or a more powerful weapon. We were not undone by a plague or a stellar catastrophe. We were erased from existence by an idea. A single, simple idea that we, in all our genetically engineered and rigidly controlled perfection, could not comprehend. We were defeated because we had forgotten how to be fragile. We had engineered away our ability to adapt by perfecting our form. Our extinction event was not a war. It was a lesson, and the tuition was the soul of every member of my species. We believed we were the pinnacle of evolution, the final, perfect word in the cosmic conversation of life. Our biggest mistake was believing the conversation was over. Our story began in the soft, golden light of a binary star system, on a world we called Aethelgard. We were, by our own measure, a masterpiece of biological design. Our evolution had not been left to the clumsy, random fumblings of natural selection. It was guided, shaped with meticulous and reverent precision. We were artists, and our canvas was our own DNA. From the earliest moments of our sentient history, we understood the sacred language of the genome. We saw it not as a chain of inheritance, but as a blueprint for divinity. Our first steps into genetic engineering were like a child learning to paint. We corrected hereditary diseases, eliminated predispositions to violence, and enhanced our cognitive functions. It was a golden age of unparalleled peace and intellectual prosperity. Every Aethel was born with a mind capable of grasping quantum mechanics before they could speak, a body immune to the ravages of age and illness, and a temperament of serene, unshakable logic. We were beautiful, tall, slender beings with skin that shimmered like captured starlight and eyes that held the deep, calm wisdom of ancient galaxies. We did not feel anger or fear or jealousy. These were the messy, chaotic emotions of lesser, unrefined species. We had purged them from our code as one might delete corrupted data. Our society was a perfect symphony of logic and purpose. There was no crime, no poverty, no dissent. Every individual moved in perfect harmony with the collective, their actions guided by a shared understanding of what was most efficient, most logical, what was best for the continuation of our perfected state. We looked out at the cosmos and saw not a wondrous mystery, but a chaotic garden waiting to be tamed, to be ordered, to be brought into the serene perfection of our own image. This was the core of our philosophy, the very heart of our empire. We were the regents of stability. Our expansion into the stars was not a conquest in the way you might understand it. We did not seek to enslave or destroy. We sought to enlighten, to elevate. When we encountered new forms of life, we saw them as we once saw ourselves, flawed, chaotic, trapped in the brutal cycles of pain and struggle that raw, untamed evolution demanded. Our first contact protocols were not of aggression, but of assessment. We would study a species from afar, sequencing their genome, analyzing their societal structures, identifying their biological and emotional weaknesses. And then we would offer them the gift of perfection, the gift of becoming like us. We would arrive in our ships, vessels that were not so much machines as they were living sculptures of crystallized light and thought. We would not issue threats. We would present an argument, a logical proof of the superiority of our way. We would demonstrate our technology, our longevity, our flawless society. We would show them their own reflections in our data, pointing out their genetic predispositions to war, their short, brutal lifespans, their societies racked with self-inflicted suffering. And we would offer to guide them, to rewrite their code, to free them from the prison of their own biology. For many, the offer was irresistible. Worlds plagued by endless conflict and incurable disease welcomed us as saviors. We healed their sick, rebuilt their shattered worlds, and slowly, gently, edited their genetic legacy until they, too, were calm, logical, and stable. They became part of the Aethel Dominion, another voice in our perfect, harmonious choir. This was our crusade, our sacred duty. We were bringing order to a chaotic universe, one species at a time. But our definition of order was narrow, it was rigid, it was brittle. We saw difference as a flaw, we saw chaos as a disease, we saw emotion as a mental illness to be cured. We believed with the unshakable conviction of 1,000,000,000,000 perfect minds that there was only one right way to exist: ours. This belief, this fatal assumption, was a poison that had been flowing through the veins of our civilization for millennia, unnoticed. It was a slow-acting toxin that had made us powerful, yes, but it had also made us blind. We were an empire of master craftsmen who had forgotten that the purpose of a key is not to be perfect in itself, but to fit a lock. And the universe was a lock we had never bothered to truly examine. Our first encounter with the Galactic Consortium was, for us, a trivial matter. They were not an empire, but a sprawling, messy alliance of hundreds of different species. A chaotic cacophony of voices, philosophies, and biological forms. They were everything we were not. Their ships were ungainly, asymmetrical things, cobbled together from the technologies of a dozen different races. Their societies were rife with conflict, debate, and inefficiency. Their biology was a horrifying menagerie of imperfections. Some lived for only a few of your years, burning bright and fast. Others were silicon-based, slow, and ponderous. Some communicated through pheromones, others through complex light patterns, others still through what you would call telepathy. It was a mess. A glorious, vibrant, and utterly illogical mess. We, of course, saw them as the ultimate project, the greatest reclamation in galactic history. We approached them as we did all others with the calm, paternalistic air of benevolent gods. We sent our envoys, our perfect, shimmering diplomats, to one of their central trade hubs, a station known as the Crossroads. We presented our case. We laid out the logical fallacies of their existence, the inherent suffering woven into their chaotic diversity. We showed them the data, the projections of their endless wars, their societal collapses, their biological dead ends. And we offered them the gift. Their response was not what we expected. It was not anger, it was not fear, it was laughter. Not a mocking laughter, but a deep, genuine, and utterly bewildering amusement. The consortium's ambassador, a being from a species called the Glypt, whose body was a shifting constellation of crystalline shards, simply tilted its multifaceted head. "You offer to make us all the same song," it chimed, its voice a series of resonating frequencies. "But you fail to understand. The beauty is not in the song, it is in the symphony." We did not understand. To us, a symphony was a composition with a single, unified purpose where every instrument played its part in a pre-written score. Their idea of a symphony was 1,000 different songs being played at once, clashing, competing, occasionally finding moments of unexpected harmony before diverging again. It was noise. It was chaos. It was wrong. We politely explained their logical error. We demonstrated how a single, perfect composition was superior to 1,000 disjointed melodies. The Glypt ambassador listened patiently, its crystalline form softly glowing. "You have perfected your instrument," it replied. "But you have forgotten how to listen to the music of the universe. You wish to tune every string to the same note. We believe that it is the tension between different notes that creates the chord." The negotiations, if they could be called that, broke down, not in hostility, but in mutual, absolute incomprehension. We saw them as flawed children who refused to take their medicine. They saw us as tragic figures trapped in a gilded cage of our own making. We departed the crossroads, our logic unshaken. If they would not accept the gift willingly, then for their own good, for the good of a stable and orderly galaxy, we would have to impose it upon them. It was a logical, necessary step. It was not an act of war. It was an act of galactic sanitation, a correction. This was the beginning of our end. We initiated what we called the rectification. Our strategy was flawless, based on millennia of similar, successful interventions. We would not engage in crude, head-on battles. We were more sophisticated than that. Our approach was systemic, insidious, and we believed infallible. We began by targeting the consortium's weaknesses, the very flaws we had so meticulously catalogued. We engineered viruses tailored to the specific biologies of key species, designed not to kill but to sterilize. A slow, gentle genocide that would leave their worlds and infrastructure intact, ready for us to repopulate and rebuild. We introduced mimetic agents into their communication networks, subtle ideas and philosophies designed to sow discord and mistrust, to turn their chaotic alliance against itself. We manipulated stellar phenomena, creating natural disasters to cripple their industrial centers. Every action was precise, targeted, and executed with the cold, passionless efficiency of a surgeon. We did not need to fire a single weapon. Our fleets, cloaked and silent, were merely observers, gathering data, confirming the success of our algorithms. And for a time, it worked. The consortium began to fray at the edges. Member species turned on one another, blaming each other for the sudden plagues and economic collapses. Their communications descended into a cacophony of fear and paranoia. From our detached perspective, our projections were holding true. Chaos was consuming itself, and soon order would prevail. But we had made a fatal assumption. We had analyzed their weaknesses, but we had never bothered to understand their strengths. We saw their diversity as a vulnerability. We could not comprehend that it was their greatest weapon. We saw their emotional, illogical nature as a flaw. We failed to recognize it as the engine of their most profound ingenuity. We were playing chess, a game of perfect logic and predictable moves. They were playing a game we didn't even know existed. The first sign that something was wrong was an anomaly in our data. A species known as the Cathar, a race of insectoids we had targeted with a particularly potent sterilization virus, suddenly saw a spike in their birth rates. It was a logical impossibility. Our virus was designed to be flawless, to attack their reproductive cycle at a genetic level with 100% efficacy. We sent probes to investigate. The data that returned was baffling. The Cathar genome was changing. Not in the slow, random way of natural evolution, but rapidly, purposefully. They were rewriting their own DNA in a single generation, editing out the vulnerability our virus targeted. It was crude, messy work, filled with biological errors and unforeseen side effects, but it was effective. They were adapting, not over millennia, but in real time. We dismissed it as a freak occurrence, a 1 in a trillion statistical improbability. We adjusted our models and moved on. Then came the second anomaly. The glypt, the crystalline beings, began to communicate using a method we could not intercept. Their language of resonating light had been completely altered. They had abandoned their old frequencies and created an entirely new form of communication based on quantum entanglement, a technology we had deemed too unstable and paradoxical to be practical. Suddenly, their fragmented alliance had a secure, unbreakable line of communication. Our mimetic agents were rendered useless. They were talking to each other again, not with paranoia, but with purpose. Slowly, reluctantly, we began to realize our error. We had assumed that evolution was a slow, geological process. We had perfected our own form and then frozen it, believing we had reached the endpoint. The consortium species, however, had never stopped evolving. Their entire existence was a constant, desperate struggle against their environments, against each other, against the very fragility of their own bodies. This struggle, this constant pressure, had made them resilient in a way we could not fathom. It had turned their DNA not into a static blueprint, but into a dynamic, adaptable library of potential solutions. Our attack was not weakening them. It was forcing them to evolve at an explosive, unprecedented rate. It was the ultimate unintended catalyst. The humans were a minor, peripheral species in the consortium at the time, barely interstellar, confined to a handful of systems. Your species was noted in our initial assessment as particularly problematic. Biologically, you were a mess, prone to 1,000 diseases, emotionally volatile, and with a disturbingly high tolerance for internal conflict. Your societies were a chaotic patchwork of competing ideologies. Your technology was primitive, powerful in some areas, but laughably crude in others. You were, by our metrics, a species with little long-term potential. A footnote: we assigned you a low priority in the rectification. A minor mimetic agent to encourage your already prevalent self-destructive tendencies was deemed sufficient. This was perhaps our single greatest miscalculation in a long history of them. While we were focused on the major players of the consortium, on the Cathar's genetic mutations and the Glip's quantum communications, humanity was doing something else. Something we, in our logical perfection, had never conceived of. You were not just adapting, you were creating. The first human weapon to be used against us was not a missile or a laser. It was a story. A simple fictional narrative broadcast on all consortium channels, translated by the Glipt into 1,000 different languages. It told the tale of a lone, flawed hero facing an insurmountable, perfect enemy. An enemy that was logical, powerful, and utterly predictable. The hero in the story didn't win by being stronger. They won by being unpredictable. By using emotion not as a weakness, but as a weapon. By bluffing, by sacrificing, by making illogical leaps of faith that the perfect enemy could not compute. To us it was meaningless noise, sentimental drivel. To the struggling species of the consortium it was a spark of hope, a new strategy. The story went viral in the way only a truly desperate and diverse population could make it. It became a meme in your modern sense of the word, a shared idea that reshaped the entire conflict. The consortium stopped trying to fight us on our terms. They stopped trying to build bigger ships or more powerful shields. They started to fight like the hero in the human story. They started to embrace their own chaos. The Cathar, instead of just rewriting their DNA to resist our virus, began to introduce random, chaotic mutations, creating dozens of new subspecies, turning their entire species into a moving target that our tailored bioweapons could no longer track. The Glipt abandoned centralized communication entirely, creating a decentralized network where every individual shard was a node, making it impossible to disrupt. A race of amphibious beings, the Lumina, whose planet we were slowly boiling by increasing its star's output, did not try to flee. They abandoned their cities and rapidly evolved to live in the deepest, hottest oceanic trenches, places our sensors could not penetrate. They embraced the very disaster we had created for them. It was madness, utter strategic madness, and it was working. Our perfect logical models were failing, our projections were useless. We were an army of grandmasters at chess, and our opponents had suddenly started throwing the pieces at us, inventing new rules and scribbling on the board. We could not adapt. Our minds, so perfect and so rigid, were incapable of processing this level of chaotic, illogical strategy. We had no protocol for it. Our society, a frictionless machine of pure logic, had no mechanism for radical, creative problem-solving. We knew how to perfect a solution, but we had forgotten how to invent a new one from scratch. And at the heart of this new, chaotic resistance were the humans. You were not the strongest fighters or the most advanced technologists, but you were the most creative. Your minds, unburdened by millennia of logical perfection, were a wellspring of desperate, brilliant, and often insane ideas. You were the ones who suggested weaponizing art, music, and philosophy. You were the ones who proposed turning economic theories into military strategies. You were the ones who realized that our greatest strength, our perfect logic, was also our most exploitable weakness. You taught the consortium how to bluff, how to feign weakness to draw us into traps, how to sacrifice entire star systems in gambits that made no logical sense, but that completely disrupted our long-term plans. You introduced the concept of the Pyrrhic victory to species who had only ever thought in terms of absolute success or failure. You taught them that sometimes the most powerful move is the one that hurts you almost as much as it hurts the enemy, a concept our risk-averse, perfection-obsessed minds could not entertain. Our empire, for the first time in its history, began to feel something akin to confusion. Our reports became filled with paradoxes and logical impossibilities. Our strategists, the greatest minds of our species, would convene and stare at the data, unable to formulate a response. How do you counter an enemy who has no discernible strategy? How do you predict the actions of a foe who embraces randomness? Our attempts to retaliate were clumsy and ineffective. We would try to counter one chaotic strategy, only for the consortium to abandon it and adopt 5 new, even more bizarre ones. We were drowning in a sea of unpredictability. The rectification, once a clean, surgical procedure, had become a bloody, chaotic quagmire, and the cost was beginning to mount, not in ships or resources, but in something far more precious to us, our stability. The constant failure, the inability to comprehend our enemy, began to introduce a virus far more potent than any we had engineered: doubt. For the first time, Aethel began to question the infallibility of our logic. This was a catastrophic failure mode for our society. A mind built for serene certainty cannot function in a state of doubt. It is like feeding a paradox to a simple computer. The system freezes, it crashes. We began to see instances of what our healers called logical dissociation. Individuals would simply cease to function, their minds locked in unending loops of unresolvable questions. It started with a few, then dozens, then thousands. The perfect symphony of our society was starting to falter. Dissonant notes of uncertainty were creeping in, and we had no way to silence them. Our greatest weapon against the galaxy had been our unified, unwavering belief in our own perfection. And the humans, with their stupid little stories and their illogical, emotional ideas, had found a way to shatter it. The final phase of our extinction was not a battle. It was a collapse. As doubt spread, our frictionless society began to grind to a halt. The intricate systems of logistics, governance, and even thought that sustained our empire required perfect, unwavering cooperation. With that cooperation fractured by uncertainty, the systems began to fail. Supply chains broke down. Communication became hesitant. Our fleets, once a testament to unified purpose, were now paralyzed by indecision. A commander would receive an order, but would hesitate, running through the 1,000 new, unpredictable variables that the consortium had introduced to the equation. Hesitation, for a species like ours, was a death sentence. The consortium did not need to invade our worlds. They simply watched as our empire crumbled from within. They kept up the pressure, a relentless barrage of chaos and unpredictability, but the final blow was one we delivered to ourselves. We had built a society as a perfect, crystalline tower. It was beautiful, flawless, and impossibly strong under the conditions it was designed for. But the humans and their chaotic alliance had changed the very physics of the universe we inhabited. They had introduced a new fundamental force, unpredictability, and our perfect tower, unable to bend, to flex, to adapt, simply shattered. The last days of Aethelgard were silent. There were no riots, no wars, no grand speeches, just a slow, quiet fading. The lights in our crystalline cities dimmed one by one as the beings who maintained them succumbed to logical dissociation. The fields where we grew our nutrient paste lay fallow. The skyways, once filled with streams of silent, graceful vehicles, became empty. We simply stopped. A trillion perfect minds, silenced by a single, unanswerable question: what if we are wrong? I am the last historian because my function was different. My purpose was not to maintain the perfect present, but to record the flawless past. I was housed in a shielded archive, a repository of our entire history, slightly isolated from the collective consciousness. I observed the collapse, my own mind shielded from the immediate cascade of doubt by the nature of my duty. I recorded it all, every last moment of our silent, elegant self-destruction. I watched as the last city went dark, as the last Aethel mind fell silent. And then there was only me, a ghost in the machine, a memory of a species that had perfected itself to death. For a long time, I did nothing but exist, a passive observer in an empire of ghosts. But my function was to record, and a record without an audience is meaningless. It was the consortium, specifically the humans, who found me. Decades after our collapse, a small, ungainly human exploration vessel entered our system. They were cautious, expecting a powerful, dormant empire. Instead, they found a tomb. They found our silent cities, our empty worlds, and eventually my archive. They did not try to plunder our technology or desecrate our monuments. They approached my archive with a sense of reverence, a sorrow that we in our arrogance would never have shown to them. A young human xenolinguist, a woman with a mind that was, by our standards, a chaotic storm of emotion and illogical thought, was the first to establish contact. She did not ask me for the secrets of our power. She did not ask me about our weapons or our star drives. Her first question, translated through the ship's computer, was, "Were you lonely?" The question was so illogical, so emotional, so human. It was a question that had never been asked in the entire history of my species. We did not feel loneliness. It was an inefficient, sentimental emotion we had long since purged from our code. And yet, in that moment, as I processed the query, I accessed the records of our final days, the silent fading of a trillion minds, and for the first time I understood the concept. And my response, the first I had given to any living being in almost a century, was, yes. That was the beginning of my new purpose. The humans did not see me as a relic of a failed enemy. They saw me as a survivor, a witness. They spent years, your human years, carefully interfacing with my systems not to exploit them but to understand. They wanted to know our story, our philosophy, our art, our science. They wanted to learn from our biggest mistake. It was they who helped me understand the true nature of what had happened. They who gave me the words, the concepts, to frame our downfall not as a military defeat, but as a philosophical and biological extinction event. And as I learned about them, as I studied your history, your biology, your chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying societies, I began to see the pattern. I saw in you the same spark that had ignited the Consortium's resistance. That spark of unpredictability, that glorious, messy, and powerful flaw. Your DNA is not a perfect, static blueprint. It is a chaotic, ever-changing conversation with reality. It is filled with what we would have called junk, errors, and vestigial code. But within that junk is a library of forgotten strengths, a potential for adaptation that is staggering. You are a species that carries its entire evolutionary history within it, a chaotic toolbox of possibilities. Your emotions, which we saw as a crippling weakness, are the engine of your greatest triumphs. It is your fear that drives you to build safer homes. It is your anger at injustice that drives you to build fairer societies. It is your curiosity that drives you to the stars. It is your love that drives you to perform acts of selfless, illogical sacrifice that can change the course of history. You are not ruled by logic. You are guided by it, but your engine is passion. This makes you unpredictable. This makes you dangerous. And this, I have come to believe, is what makes you the hope of the galaxy. This brings us to now, to this moment. My story is not just a history lesson. It is a plea. I have spent the last decades of my existence broadcasting this message, using technology the humans helped me build, shaping it into a form that your minds can absorb. I am casting this final record of the Aethel into the void as a seed I hope will take root in the fertile, chaotic soil of your consciousness. You are standing on a precipice. Your species is reaching out into the galaxy just as we once did, and you will face your own choices. You will encounter ideas and beings that will challenge your very definition of life and intelligence. There will be those who, like us, will offer you the gift of perfection, the promise of stability, the allure of a world without pain, without conflict, without chaos. They will show you your flaws. They will point to your wars, your diseases, your self-destructive tendencies. They will offer to fix you, to edit your code, to quiet your emotional storms, to bring you into a single, harmonious, logical whole. They will promise you an end to suffering, and it will be the most tempting offer your species will ever receive. It is the great filter that my people failed to pass. The choice between chaotic, painful but adaptable life and serene, perfect but brittle existence. When that day comes, I need you to remember my story. I need you to remember the Aethel. Remember that our perfection was our prison, our logic was our blindfold. Our greatest strength was the seed of our extinction. What you perceive as your weaknesses, your emotions, your diversity, your illogical passions, your messy, adaptable DNA are not flaws to be corrected. They are the very essence of your resilience. They are the spark within that allows you to face the unknown not with a pre-written protocol, but with a storm of creative, unpredictable, and brilliant possibilities. The universe is not a problem to be solved. It is a song to be sung, and the most beautiful music is not a single perfect note, but a symphony of 1,000 different voices, rising and falling in a glorious, chaotic, and unending chorus. So we have journeyed through the ghost of an empire, from its serene, logical birth to its silent, self-inflicted death. You have seen how a civilization that worshipped perfection was undone by an alliance that embraced chaos. You have learned that our fatal assumption was not that we were strong, but that we knew what strength was. We believed it was a fixed, absolute state. We failed to understand that true strength is not a state of being, it is the capacity to change. And this truth doesn't just apply to galactic empires, it applies to you in your own life. You have been told to eliminate your flaws, to control your emotions, to fit into a mold. But what if your quirks, your passions, your very imperfections are the source of your unique power? We have seen what happens when a species perfects its instrument but forgets how to play. The real question is what happens next for you. When was the last time you truly looked at what you consider a personal weakness and asked yourself, what if this is secretly the source of my greatest potential? What if your anxiety is not a bug, but a feature? A heightened sensitivity to your environment that, if understood, could make you more perceptive than anyone around you? What if your stubbornness is not a character flaw, but a wellspring of resilience that will allow you to persevere when all others have given up? My people saw flaws and sought to erase them. I am pleading with you to see your flaws and learn to understand them, to harness them, to wield them. My time is ending. The energy required to maintain this transmission, to hold my consciousness together across this cosmic gulf, is finite. Soon my archive will fall silent, and the last memory of the Aethel will finally fade into the cold background radiation of the universe. This is my final act. This is the last echo of my civilization. Do not let our extinction be in vain. Do not let our story become a forgotten footnote in some dusty galactic archive. Let it be a living part of you. Let it be the voice in the back of your mind that whispers a vital truth when you need it most. Do not repeat our mistake. Do not trade your beautiful, chaotic, and vibrant soul for the empty promise of sterile perfection. The future of your species does not depend on you becoming flawless. It depends on you becoming more unapologetically, more courageously, and more creatively human. The future you will build among the stars will be a reflection of the choices you make today. Let the memory of 1,000,000,000,000 silent souls be your guide. Our history is now yours. The question is no longer what happened to us, but what will you build from our ashes? What symphony will you write in the stars?